What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and welcome to another installment of Best Lists in Warhammer 40k. Now, this one is a little bit special because we actually already did one this week. Normally, we'll take lists from undefeated records across large events in Warhammer 40k from the past weekend and look at them. In my video earlier this week, I actually looked at the World Team Championship, the biggest team event in Warhammer 40k that takes teams from between 30 and 40 countries and makes them compete against each other. This year it was won by Poland, and we broke down all of the lists from Team Poland. But today we're going to be going back and talking about some of the lists in singles events that went undefeated this weekend. Now today I wanted to do something a little bit different because we have talked over the last couple of weeks about the top 2 or 3 factions in the game quite a bit. What I wanted to do is actually pull focus a little bit away from them and towards some of the X and 1 lists from underrepresented factions that did very well this weekend. Now, if you watch my Tuesday show, I actually do deep dives into these lists. So if you want to see me go through a lot of results from each weekend, you can catch me live at 4 p.m. US Eastern Time on Tuesdays. So let's dive into what went well this week. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about Aeldari. Obviously, they are unequivocally the strongest faction in Warhammer 40k, and I talk about them every week. So I'm not going to spend too much time here. The War Masters GT is a super major 298 player event that occurs just before the WTC. So it is one of the biggest concentrations of really strong national players from around the world. It's a hugely prestigious event, and if you qualify for the top 4 cut, you can go a full 9 rounds, which was done by Eldar. Eldar actually made 3 of the 4 top cut placings. They also took down the Iowa GT, a 61-player grand tournament elsewhere. This was actually with a perfect score. Ben Sherwin, over a 6-round event, actually didn't drop a single point, scoring a perfect 600. I don't know if I've ever seen that before, but I'm not surprised that Eldar were able to do it. We're not going to dive too much into these lists. They are almost identical. They both run Fire Prisms and Wraith Knights and stuff like that, so there they are. I mean, if you want to see Eldar lists, I did talk about Eldar lists on every other installment of this video, so yeah, that's what I have to say about that faction. Please nerf soon, GW. Oh my god. Genestealer cults continue to make a showing of it. Post their nerf, they aren't seeing the same widespread success as they were upon the faction's release. They were able to take down undefeated records at Killing Fields of Istvan as well as the Texas Open. Justin Moore's list from the Texas Open is the one that we will talk about today. This was a 111-player event played in Ohio, USA. I'm just kidding, it was Texas. That's a stupid joke. This list was running triple Clamavis, as well as double Nexus and double Primus. This is a ton of technology designed around preventing opposing deep strikes. Very good for the mirror match and for any factions who are relying heavily on deep strike, which, to be fair, is a lot of them right now. There are tons and tons of armies in the meta right now that are relying very heavily on either strategic reserves or deep strikes, and the Clamavis can shut that down with its Omni Scrambler aura. Making up the battle line allotment, we have 2 units of 5 Acolyte hybrids to deliver some demolition charges, 6 units of Neophyte hybrids with their combinations of seismic cannons and grenade launchers. Those are 20 models each, as well as Achilles Ridge Runners, both of them with heavy mortars, one of them with a Survey Auger to remove cover and grant those crossfire benefits to enemies that they shoot with the mortar. Now, Texas Open didn't just have Genestealer cult at the top, we also saw a pretty good showing from Thousand Suns, a faction that was expected to do really well at the beginning of the edition and has been popping up more and more as their builds solidify. This was an undefeated 6-0 record from Kit Smith Hanna, who was running Ahriman on a disc, as well as Magnus the Red, an Exalted Sorcerer on foot, as well as 1 Exalted Sorcerer on a disc to slow enemies down, especially useful in the slow tanky matchups like Adeptus Custodes or Necrons. We then have 3 Infernal Masters, one of them running the Arcane Vortex to increase his damage output, another one with the Umbralific Crystal to teleport himself around. These guys have probably one of the best flamer weapons in the game, especially since it can gain devastating wounds from the Cult of Magic detachment ability, and the Infernal Master themselves has the ability to flip those wound rolls into automatic successes. Especially for Arcane Vortex, this means that this guy is automatically guaranteed to do 2 mortal wounds every time he shoots, just about, unless you are saving his use of his ability somewhere else. And if he gets any natural 6s as well, he could be piling that up to 4 or 6 or 8 mortal wounds very quickly. We then have a normal Thousand Sun Sorcerer as well, so this list is wildly character focused with a grand total of 8 8 characters. We then have 5 units of 5 Rubric Marines to carry some of those characters around, a Mutalith Vortex Beast, 2 Rhinos, a unit of Flamers Demonically Manifesting, as well as the Changeling. This list is absolutely wild, really focused on generating tons and tons of Cabal points and getting the maximum work out of those Infernal Masters, which is an archetype that I like to play myself. So love me some Infernal Masters. Really cool to see a list like this on the table. It is super unique. Keeping with the theme, Chaos Space Marines also saw a pretty good showing this week, with a top 1 and 2 placing at the Hammer of Wrath GT. This was a 46-player GT held in California. They also saw the only non-Eldar top 4 cut at the War Master GT as well. We'll talk about the winning list of the Hammer of Wrath GT. This was piloted by Arthur II, who played a Chaos Lord, just a pretty solid beatstick character who can increase his melee output and gives you a Rites of Battle effect, Cypher to act as a lone operative, 2 units of Dark Commune, as well as a Master of Possession. There's a Cultist mob in the battle line to add a little bit of utility, to add Objective Secured, 3 Chaos Rhinos to carry some of the ground-pounding Space Marines the list also had, and then 2 units of Accursed Cultists to carry those Dark Commune characters around. The Dark Commune grant the Accursed Cultists a 5+ invulnerable save to go along with their already existent Feel No Pain. They also give them a once per game ability that allows the unit to advance and charge, gets +1 to hit and wound, which can get over the Accursed Cultists' relatively mediocre melee profiles, but they make so many solid attacks that +1 to hit and wound actually turns them into a fairly lethal threat. And with a massive number of, I think 28 base wounds inside the unit itself, and the ability to regenerate itself in both your command phase and your opponent's command phase, the Accursed Cultist units with an invulnerable save baked in are ridiculously hard to kill. These guys really kind of flew under the radar originally, I think, when the index came out, but they definitely more and more have been showing that they give Chaos Space Marines a wildly powerful frontline that they can use to buy space for their super powerful guns. We then have 2 units of 10 Chosen with a combination of weapons. These guys are a great caddy for strong melee profiles, especially with their ability to advance and charge. So starting in a Rhino, they can then disembark 3 inches away from the Rhino, advance, charge, and get stuck in with potentially full rerolls from the Chaos Undivided stratagem. We then have 2 units of Noise Marines to add support from those Blast Masters in the back, as well as a huge unit of 4 Obliterators, again, to drop down onto the table, grant themselves indirect fire, and blow something up. Now, I've said it before, and I'll say it again, the more that I see Chaos Space Marines, the more that the depth of combinations and strong data sheets within the faction really impresses me. I think they're buoyed by the fact that their detachment stratagems might be some of the best in the entire game. Things like Dark Obscuration, keeping your units safe, Profane Zeal to give yourself rerolls, and they even have a modicum of Armor of Contempt, make this an incredibly flexible faction, and it's really cool to see them doing well. That said, the Loyalist Marines also have seen a little bit of success with the Golden Ticket event, a 64-player GT held at Warhammer World itself, being taken down by none other than Mikey Herbert from Hellstorm Wargaming, playing Deathwatch with the Black Spear Task Force to an undefeated record. This list is similar to the Deathwatch lists that we've seen in the past. It's running a Librarian and Phobos armor to keep an Infiltrator unit safe, a Primaris Captain with the Thief of Secrets special melee weapon, a Watchmaster with the Tome of the Ectoclades to add a CP tax, as well as that once per game double Oaths of Moment effect, 3 units of Deathwatch Veteran, these guys rocking as many frag cannons and Deathwatch Thunderhammers as they can possibly fit into the unit, making them very good both in melee and ranged and extremely maneuverable with their Teleportarium. We have a Desolation Squad, a unit that Deathwatch can potentially support almost as well as a Gladius Task Force, given all of their special ammunition stratagems. We then have a Hellblaster squad of 10 Hellblasters, 2 Inceptor squads to add as utility, that 1 Infiltrator squad that the Phobos Librarian will join into, and 2 Landspeeders that can help buff the blast weapons. Now, we'll talk about Golden Ticket and Hammer of Wrath GTs in a moment once again, but before we do that, we just want to close things out with an undefeated record from Necrons. As a little bit of an aside, there was an undefeated Necron result last week that I didn't mention because I totally forgot about it. Necrons definitely have continued to put up some good results over the course of the edition, even when I don't put their lists in the video. This was at the Naughty K GT. This was a relatively small 25-player Grand Tournament and was won with a 5-0 record by Josie Cartwright, actually a T5S2 Invitational qualifier from past seasons. Josie was able to take it down with an interesting list featuring a monolith, not something that we see too often. This list included 2 Hexmark Destroyers, one of them as the caddy for the Sovereign Coronal, a Locust Lord with a Resurrection Orb to attach into a unit of 6 Locust Destroyers, or potentially even a smaller unit of 3 Locust Heavy Destroyers, but I think we're probably taking it in the Destroyer unit. An Overlord with a Resurrection Orb, a Technomancer with the Hypermaterial Ablator to give stealth and potential cover to a unit that it joins, as well as the ever-present Sempiternal Weave Transcendent Catan. We then have a Canoptic Reanimator to buff all of our reanimation rolls. 1 Canoptic Spider with a Gloom Prism. This gives you a 6+ Feel No Pain and a potential 4+ Feel No Pain against psychic attacks. Extremely good in very particular matchups like Thousand Suns or Tyranids. We then have 2 units of 2 Cryptothralls to join into some of these units and keep them alive. A unit of 5 Death Marks. These guys have incredibly powerful sniper profiles and deep strike, so they're not only a good utility unit, but can also pick out characters very easily as well. They're even at Strength 5 AP2. Potentially lethal to Space Marine characters that come in at 4 or 5 wounds at a relatively high toughness that a lot of sniper rifles can't really dent. We then have a unit of 6 Locust Destroyers for that Locust Lord to join, a unit of 3 Locust Heavy Destroyers with Gauss Destructors to add a little bit of anti-tank, 10 Lich Guard to add in the Hypermaterial Ablator, Cryptothralls, one of the Technomancers, and the Overlord to make an incredibly strong Bulwark Brick, a unit of 3 Tomb Blades for more utility, and that 1 Monolith. The Monolith is a super interesting profile. It's a toughness 14, 2+ save, towering Titan. It's got a pretty solid array of attacks. This list was running it with 4 Death Rays. They are one-shot weapons, but with sustained D3, which gives them the opportunity to potentially quadruple their attacks, which is pretty wild. At Strength 12, AP4, D6 +1 damage. It also fires a Particle Whip for 3d6 blasting, devastating wounds, Strength 8 AP 1, 2 damage attacks. All of these can be buffed by the Sovereign Coronal from the Hexmark to get +1 to hit and potential rerolls from their reroll stratagem. The real reason that you're taking the Monolith is the Eternity Gate. This allows you in your reinforcement step to pick up a Necron infantry unit from the battlefield or in reserve and set it wholly within 6 inches and outside engagement range of enemy models. It can't charge that turn, but what you can potentially do with that is use it to take table space, having the Monolith either deep strike or set up on the table, then pick up a big unit of Lich Guard or something from elsewhere on the table and dump them on an opponent's objective. Obviously, they can't get into melee, which they would like to do, but that's not the end of the world because the Lich Guard aren't the hardest hitting melee combatant, but one thing the Monolith can potentially allow them to do is jump across the table much faster than they would normally. It also just acts as a big bulwark behind all of the other ridiculously strong, resilient threats that the Necron army is able to present, with that big unit of 10 Lich Guard, as well as the Transcendent Catan being largely the units that your opponent is going to have to deal with. All those units are ridiculously hard to take down, and the Monolith just sort of compounds that. And with that, we'll move on to a couple X and 1 lists from factions that we actually have not talked about on this series. Now, we picked these up while going through lists over on Tactical Tuesday, but I would be remiss if I didn't give some props to players for taking these underplayed factions into competitive events and doing relatively well with them. The first one is from the Hammer of Wrath GT. This was Matthew Gayer playing Adeptus Mechanicus with a 4-1 record. This list is running 2 Tech Priest Domini as well as 1 Manipulus with the Omni Sterilizer. 4 units of Skitarii Vanguard. Those are all jumping into Scorpius Dune Riders. This allows them to more easily apply their -1 OC aura on enemy units, making them absolutely ridiculously strong at stealing objectives away. The Scorpius Dune Rider, because of its ability, can advance and still disembark troops, so it can move potentially up to 18 inches, then disembark a Skitarii Vanguard unit onto an opposing objective. Even if you have a high volume OC2 unit, the Skitarii Vanguard are still going to steal the objective away by reducing your OC down to 1, out OCing you, given that those guys themselves are objective control 2. Otherwise, we just have 3 individual Iron Strider Ballistari. These guys are pretty good as utility units, and just for 50 points you get a Twin-Linked Las Cannon, which is pretty sweet, and 3 units of 6 Cataphron Breachers, all of which running heavy arc rifles. These dudes can fire up to 4 anti-vehicle shots and can be joined by the Tech Priests. All of them buffing the survivability of the Cataphrons, the Domini giving 5+ Feel No Pain, the Manipulus giving a once per game 4+ invulnerable save, as well as lethal hits. This allows you to more easily trigger their reactive fire ability, and with the 40 Skitarii battle line models in the list, it's relatively easy to get them close to a battle line unit, which then gives them full rerolls to hit. With the ability to potentially shoot twice with these Cataphrons, with full rerolls and pretty high damage anti-vehicle weapons, this actually makes them pretty good armor crackers and fairly lethal against a wide variety of targets. I think in order to play optimally within Adeptus Mechanicus, a list like this is probably where the faction is going to end up, and it's nice to see it do pretty well despite the fact that Adeptus Mechanicus has not been putting up very good results recently. Moving back to the Golden Ticket event, we also saw Robert Kempton take 6th place with a 5-and-run record using Drukhari, another faction that we don't typically see. This list was running an Archon with the Art of Pain to generate additional pain tokens, 3 units of Kabalite Warriors, as well as 2 units of Rax. These guys can jump into Raiders and Venoms. Interestingly, the Venoms do allow the Kabalite Warriors to potentially combat squad themselves into 2 units of 5, which could let them split their non-heavy weapon-bearing models off into a separate Venom to go move and act as a utility unit to steal objectives or to score secondary missions, then put the heavy weapons in the Raiders to more efficiently use pain tokens. You can also attach the Archon into one, and he gives them full rerolls to hit and wound, even on their ranged attacks when he spends a pain token to empower himself. There are 2 Chronos to offer their auras of pain token regeneration, 2 Mandrake units to act as utility units, as well as 3 Ravagers to be extremely efficient applicators of Dark Lances. We then have a Reaver unit, a super fast biker squad that has a Heat Lance, so it's able to advance and perform actions because it has an assault weapon equipped, and these guys can do mortal wounds while moving with their eviscerating flybys. Then we also have 3 units of Scourges, 2 of them with 4 Dark Lances, the last one with 4 Haywire Blasters. While Drukhari does have a little bit of flexibility, I think a lot of Drukhari lists end up looking just like this one, where they are rocking basically the maximum anti-tank weapons. Sometimes you see less transports be played in favor of some of the more resilient pain engines, things like Talos, which can rock Heat Lances and Twin-Linked Liquefiers themselves, but this one is playing the transport game. The big downside is that those transports have a tough time maneuvering, being physically large and unable to fly over terrain anymore, so it's tough to hide them in a position where they can also move into and impact the table. But if you are just using them as caddies for tons and tons of Dark Lances, I think that's pretty solid. Super cool list from Robert Kempton, and congratulations to him for going X and 1, taking that 6th place spot at the Golden Ticket GT. And with that, those are all the best lists in Warhammer 40k for now. Let me know down in the comment section what you thought about this format, talking about some X and 1 lists rather than focusing on the top 2 or 3 in the game. Other than that, big thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. Thanks as well to everybody who supports the channel, either over on Patreon at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise, YouTube channel members, and Twitch subscribers. All you people are great and I love you. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.